Okay, class, welcome to Greek Mythology Allusions video number 2. This one will cover heroes and villains. This is listed as the number 1 video because there will be 2 videos covering heroes and villains. The first one I'm going to look at is the idea of Hercules or Heracles, noting that the number 1 in the corner, remembering we are doing note cards on these and there are 17 note cards for this unit. Hercules is one of the most famous Greek heroes. He is not known for fighting or defeating any one particular monster or villain. He is known for his strength, his ingenuity, his courage, and his sexual prowess. He is so much a hero that they actually made him a demigod, or made him, gave him god status, and actually made him the gatekeeper of Mount Olympus because of his strength and his courage. And he's also known for being the son of Zeus and Alcmene. He is actually half god and half human, but he was raised by human parents. I would look up the idea of how he was raised because that plays into the role that he plays in Greek mythology. The next one is Perseus and Medusa. Those are cards number 2 and 3. Perseus is the son of Zeus and mortal Danae, so he is also half god and half human or half mortal. He fits more on the mortal side than he does on the human side, unlike Hercules. Perseus's grandfather, you need to know this background story. Perseus's grandfather, it was predicted that his grandson would grow up to kill him. So he actually imprisoned his daughter Danae in a tomb underground. That was a room that only had one ray of sunlight coming through it, and Zeus thought that this was unfair, so he actually came down in the form of light and impregnated Danae. And when she gave birth to Perseus, which was a son. His grandfather thought he had actually outwitted everyone and that she wouldn't get pregnant, but since she did, she was able to give birth to the son. And you need to know how he grew up to eventually kill his grandfather. Now, what Perseus is not more known for is not necessarily having the myth come true or the prediction come true that he would kill his grandfather, but more the idea of killing Medusa. Medusa is what we call a gorgon, and it's a mythical being that actually has snakes as heads, or as hair. And if you look into her eyes, you will actually turn to stone. So this statue actually depicts perfectly the idea of it being stone, the idea of what took place between Perseus and Medusa. When Perseus went to kill her, he used his shield and looked in his shield instead of looking directly in her eyes so that he could see where she was, so he could cut off her head. And when he came back home, as the hero, he brought her head as a trophy. Okay, the next main part that I'm going to cover is the idea of the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are 2 Greek epic poems. An epic poem is a poem of about 10,000 to 12,000 lines, being several hundred pages in length, and it is in rhymed couplets, and fits very much in that poetic form with the idea that this was passed down from an oral storytelling tradition. So Homer, when he wrote these, the intention is that people would sit around a campfire and they would tell this story, and it was told in poetic form so that the storytellers would remember this. And neither of these were actually written down for about 500 years until after Homer had passed away, but the stories did originate with Homer. There are 2 of them. Both of them cover the same story, just one is the actual Trojan War, which is the Iliad, and the other one is the Odyssey, which is Odysseus, who was one of the heroes during the Trojan War. It's his journey to get back home. So between the 2 stories, it actually covers the span of about 20 years. Now, the majority of the note cards come from the Iliad. The first 2 are the cities, Sparta and Troy. Sparta is in Greece. Troy is in what we would call modern day Turkey, over here on the east coast of the Aegean Sea, where Sparta is down toward the bottom of Greece. Now, the idea here of the story is that this is the first war that actually united the Greek tribes together, because they were known as superstates all throughout Greece, but they all came together for one cause, to fight against the Trojans. Now, the main aspect of the Trojan War, what the Trojan War is more famous for, is the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse, noting the fact that it is a wooden figure, it was built on the beach of Troy while they were waiting for a funeral to take place. The Greeks actually built the Trojan horse at the behest of Achilles and Odysseus, who came up with this plan, where soldiers would actually hide in this. They would leave it as a gift on the beach of Troy, and the Trojans came out after the funeral of Hector and saw the Trojan horse there, so they wheeled it into the gates of Troy, shut the gates back up, and that night, they thought it was a gift from the gods, but that night, the Greek soldiers that were actually inside of it came out, and they actually started the idea of the ransacking of Troy. So, noticing the idea of the Trojan soldier and the Trojan horse and how it fits in today, and that idea that things do not appear as what they seem to be. Now, there are many characters that fit into the idea of the Iliad and the story that's taking place. The two most important ones are Paris and Helen. Noticing the pictures here all come from the movie Troy. I actually highly suggest the movie Troy because it actually nicely follows the story of the Iliad if you have not seen it. Paris and Helen were two young lovers. Helen was actually not married to Paris, but when they fell in love, when he and his brother Hector were on a trip to Greece to actually sign like a peace treaty, he fell in love with Helen, who was married to Menelaus, and he basically kidnapped her and took her back to Troy and married her basically when she was in Troy, because that's how much in love they were. So her name, Helen of Troy, she's actually Helen of Sparta, but she becomes Helen of Troy, and it's the idea that these thousands of ships sailed across the Aegean Sea, all because of her, and the idea of trying to get her back. The next group is Agamemnon and Menelaus. Agamemnon is the king of Sparta, and his younger brother Menelaus was the husband of Helen. He's the one that felt so spurned because his wife was kidnapped by Paris, or he thought she was kidnapped, but in actuality she went with him. But Agamemnon uses Helen's kidnapping as an excuse to attack Troy. He's always wanted Troy and a reason to attack the Trojans, and now he has it. So now he unites all of Greece together in one and is able to get his 1,000 ships to go there with the excuse of trying to get Helen back, but in actuality Agamemnon wants Troy. So we have Menelaus, who's the husband of Helen, and Agamemnon, the king of Sparta. Here we have Hector and Andromache. Hector is the brother of Paris. He is the older brother. He is the heir to the throne of Troy. Here you see him pictured with his wife Andromache, who they just recently given birth to a son. So that idea of that the city of Troy would actually be passed down along the line to his son, not to Paris. But Hector is the hero of Troy. He's the warrior, he's the fighter, he's the leader, he's all the wit, all the strategic planning idea, and he's in charge of the Trojan army. So he's not weak like his brother. Paris is very weak, very effeminate, very in that mode, and not a fighter. He's much more a politician than a fighter. So Hector takes on this idea that he needs to protect his brother Paris and protect Helen, because Helen came with them, and he did not know at first that she came with him. He was surprised about it once they were gone. And when they get back to Troy, he has to support his brother and find a way to be prepared for this war that he knows that they're going to have to fight against the Spartans. What he doesn't expect, though, is that the war is actually going to be against all of Greece. And he does die, and that leaves Paris to be the next king because the son is way too young. Achilles and Priam. Achilles is the one who actually kills Hector. And Hector actually kills Menelaus when Paris and Menelaus are supposed to fight and duke it out for the idea of Helen. Hector intercedes when he sees that Menelaus is about to kill Paris, and he ends up killing Menelaus. And then, as a retaliation aspect, Achilles goes and kills Hector. Achilles he's also part Greek god and part mortal. You need to know his parentage, so I would look that up, and knowing which is the mortal and which is the Greek god is important. He is very much the majority Greek god, and there's only one part of him that is his weakness, and that is his heel, and that's where you get the idea of the Achilles heel, because when he is shot in it with an arrow in the heel by Paris, it actually wounds him enough to where when someone shoots him in the back with an arrow, it actually kills him because of how weakened he is by his Achilles heel. Priam is the last one here. From the Iliad, Priam is the king of Troy. So he is the current father of Hector and Paris. He is very upset that his son brought Helen, but he understands the idea of love and the idea that it overtakes him and how powerful and strong it is. So he definitely gets upset with his son, but he also, on the other side, helps him, protects Helen, and goes in with the war. And he actually sees Hector die in battle. And Priam ends up actually dying in the ransacking of Troy. The Spartans do win. They do overtake Troy because of the Trojan horse in there, and basically Troy no longer existed, but people were able to escape. Okay, moving into the Odyssey. So the Iliad takes place in the first 10 years, and the Odyssey is the last 10 years of these 20 years. There are 3 note cards for this, and the reason I didn't do as much on the Odyssey is because you did most of it in 9th grade when you read the Odyssey with your 9th grade English teacher. Now, Odysseus is one of the heroes on the Greek side that helps to come up with the idea of building the Trojan horse. He helps to build it. He's one of the people actually hiding inside of it. And he is one of the survivors of the Trojan War. Now, after the Trojan War, the idea of the Odyssey is his journey home. And an Odyssey is this idea, it's a long journey that travels throughout. So, Odysseus, who is our main hero here, goes on this journey. And if you see this idea that he lives in the city of Ithaca, and he leaves Troy and he's trying to get back home. But instead of getting back home, the Greek gods are very upset with him because of what happened in Troy. So they feel that they need to take some retaliation on him. So during his journey or his odyssey home, he's thrown off course and required to complete 12 different tasks. Remembering 12 is one of those unifying numbers within Greek mythology. So you see it here in the idea that he stops at 12 different places and completes 12 different tasks along his journey. Knowing all of the tasks isn't necessarily important, but you do notice probably the Cyclops and the Sirens. And the fact that I've talked about those before, the Sirens are basically the mermaids. And noting where these, don't necessarily know all of the journey, but noting the idea of the journey that he went on. Now, when he gets home to Ithaca, he's been gone for basically 20 years, and he finds his wife Penelope and a grown son that he never actually met, because when he left, his wife was pregnant. So he has to actually, when he comes in, no one knows that he's still alive. Everyone, after him being gone for 20 years, assumes that he's dead. And there are suitors trying to pursue his wife. Now, Penelope, comes up with a series of challenges to prove the fact that someone is worthy to marry her. So the main one that she comes up with is this idea that she has 12 axes. In this picture, they don't really look like axes, but 12 axes lined up, and the person who can shoot the arrow to go through all of the handles of them would be the one worthy enough to marry her. It actually happens to be that Odysseus wins the challenge and is able to then show the truth that he is Odysseus. She puts him through another test as well, and you should look up that test. My time is up, and I'll see you tomorrow in class.